thank you guys for showing up. Um, so I'm going to just like dive into it. I wrote a number of questions for you, so like see my book. Especially for you, Temi. One of the things that I thought about asking you first, that it was the thing about your age, being able to have written a book that size. It was really really shocking. And how was the reception of your book? I mean, by the way, the title of the book, the title of our book is "Do You Dream of Terra-Two?" I mean, well, you should summarize. I want to attempt to keep everything in between conversations so that we can encourage them to buy it, right? So yeah. So what's the first? How was the reception to that book? You know, I've seen you in spaces with some really really massive authors. You know, but I just want to hear from you. How was it?
Yeah, so my book came out in March. It's called "Do You Dream of Terra-Two?" And yeah, quite a lot about it is about coming of age. It's about these astronauts who are picked from age, well, when they're teenagers, they train to colonize another planet. And in my story, they're 18 to 20. So a lot of the story is about why did they leave, and it explores 7 different points of view, and they all have different reasons. So like one of their fathers is a missionary, and another one of them is sort of running away from an abusive home. I think because it's a book about space and because it's a science fiction, one of the receptions I definitely get, I suppose, is some surprise. Because I spend a lot of time, I've read lots of books that I really love that are set in space, like Solaris and Kim Stanley Robinson's books, but mine really focuses on, it's quite introspective, and it's really about the characters and why do they choose to go to space, and what psychological impact does their isolation have?
You're already eating into some of the queries I was going to give you. And, you know, for you, Wole, I've known about you for years. Interestingly, some years ago, you were nominated for the King Prize, and also your surname happens to be my mom's surname.
Oh, okay.
Middle name also.
Connection.
You know, so I'd already heard of you on like her, who I was meeting on the pages for the first time. Right. So what happened with your work for me was reading a collection of short stories that were about a lot of things, and about, I mean, like I told you last night, it wasn't about a specific thing. And it was also interesting that you wrote a book, a science fiction book, that was easy for muggles like me, you know, you know, for muggles like me to be able to get into, you know, get into it, relate to the narratives, and you know, it was amazing. How were you able to imbibe that space? Also, speaking from your you know, background as an engineer, you know, all of that.
Okay. So, I mean, first of all, you say you're not a geek, but then you open with a line from Harry Potter, like Harry Potter deep dive. I mean, come on, muggles. You're one of us. You're one of us. Yeah, for me, I think in terms of writing science fiction in a way that's accessible to people, just comes naturally, because as an engineer, as I've gone up in the field and become more of a senior engineer, I find I have to explain highly technical concepts to business people, because they're the ones making decisions. And a lot of that is storytelling. You need to tell them a story. They have an objective they want, and you have all these technical challenges, and most of the time you're either asking them for money or explaining why something is going to take a certain amount of time. And being able to do that effectively is telling a story that captures the essence of all the technical detail without actually using all the technical detail. And actually, as I've written more science fiction, I've gotten better at doing that. And as I've also done that in my career as well, it's also helped my writing, I think. I'm self-assessment, but I think it's improved over time. Some people might disagree. But overall, yes. And also, when you're thinking of writing a book that's for other people to consume, you don't want to just go into specific detail that doesn't add anything to the experience of the story.
I mean, that's another thing about the work. I mean, the books, the two, Do You Dream of Terra-Two and Incomplete Solutions. It was being able to read a narrative, and you guys were not immersed in the science of things, so you guys were not speaking in science.
Right, but there is one thing I usually aim for when I write is I was inspired a lot by science fiction stories when I was a child. As Isaac Asimov is a early favorite. I read his nonfiction and his fiction, and that's part of the reason I ended up becoming an engineer, and part of why I like science. So when I write as well, I want people to get that sense of wonder that can come sometimes from discovering a really wild concept, but also figuring out that it's possible. I've just extrapolated from something that could happen to this fantastical situation, and I want people to get that sense of wonder, like, oh, how much of this was complete fiction and how much of this is based on the real science? And then people go and read about it and study it. And sometimes I've run into people at festivals and they're like, that ion propulsion system, or this particular orbital mechanics that you described here, not entirely right. And I'm like, you know what? I like that you checked. Excellent. That's good. That's a good thing.
I mean, there's that thing where you guys, and I keep saying you guys because I'm a mogul. There's that thing you guys tend to always do whenever when you meet each other, sci-fi heads. You just go all speaking in science, and the likes of us who never did science, who could not really get, there was a story, Drift Flux, or something like that, where you were explaining, it was about a spaceship, and then you were explaining certain concepts. I'm like, how am I understanding these things?
But you were understanding.
I did. I could understand them, and again, it was something that was unique about your work, because over time, I am a big reader, and I read everything, and science fiction has always been that one genre that I could not penetrate. So I've always been fleeting in between magical realism and every other thing, African futurism, Afrofuturism. It's always been my thing. But for both of you, actually, there was that intentionality. So I have a question with regards to that. There was a way you insisted on humanizing your characters and not majoring on the spaceships. In fact, there was one of the beautiful things also was the history, the historical facts that you kept giving, and they were not about the machines, it was about the people. So my question is, were you more, as a science fiction writer, were you more interested in writing about people who have existed or who are existing in this so-called science world, or were you just hitting at the rest of us moguls,
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I love about science fiction is that science does kind of inspire awe, and lots of our discoveries do, and that's definitely also a feeling that I want to sort of create in a reader when they're reading it. But I guess since my book is set in space, and a lot of the fiction that I've read has been set in space, like Kim Stanley Robinson, Neil Stephenson, they're real giants who have written quite a lot about space. So it was quite a conscious decision to approach it from a more personal, psychological standpoint. And I think that is because I feel like this ground is really well trodden, and I want to sort of contribute to this genre in a different way. So that's why I made that decision for this book.
Yeah, Jason Sheehan of NPR described, still going on in the same sense, described your work as an oddity in the science fiction genre.
Definitely.
Reading that kind of statement from an authority in a critical figure, how did you feel? I understand the fact that you wanted to do something different, but Was it flattering?
Yeah, I was really very touched by that review, that NPR review. I felt like he actually really did understand the heart of the story, and he really did understand that it was about people. And I think he said, like, tragedy beats at the heart of the story.
Yeah.
And quite a lot about it is about leaving home and leaving Earth and being alone and sort of facing your own mortality. And, you know, some of the characters don't survive. And a lot of the question of the book is why keep going on this journey when it's basically an act of faith to believe that Terra-Two exists.
The next thing we're going to do now, I'm going to ask both of them to read portions of the stories. Wole has a whole collection of stories, so it's just going to decide which one of them is just to read from, you know, because of time. And so we can start from there, and Temi, you take it after him.
Okay, so I'm going to read from the last story in my collection. It's called When We Dream, We Are Our God. And I'm just going to read the opening 2 or 3 paragraphs, I think. Today, in a small, quiet room near the center of Lagos University Teaching Hospital, I went into the cold darkness of sleep. And when I returned to the warm light of consciousness, I had become a god. I can now see the world through the million eyes of my kin, and I feel with the millions of square kilometers of our collective skin. Day and night, pain and pleasure, joy and sorrow, the taste of a durian, the warmth of a mother's love, the slow, sludgy feel of mind slurry against bare feet, the cold feel of a loaded pistol, the explosive ecstasy of orgasm, all are available to me in an instant, in many places, in many forms. They are input data from parts that are now both me and part of me. I see so much, I feel so much. There's so much more me than there was before. And I know so much more than each of us that make up this new and wonderful thing could possibly know with our collective cognition, collective memory. We have gained access to so much more. I know your mother does not approve of what I have done, but I need you to understand why I have done it, why you will eventually do it too. It is, when considered objectively, the natural progression of things. Besides, we forced our own hand. That is perhaps my fault, at least in part, but I cannot say I am sorry for it. Let me explain. First, the what of things. In the beginning was the void, and the void was a scalar field and quantized particle duality in which all the mass of our universe resided, characterized by the random quantum fluctuation that is fundamental to all things. One such strange and wonderful fluctuation led to a phase transition and the release of potential energy, a glorious and beautiful explosion throwing all matter and energy into violent existence. Galaxies were born, astronomical objects crystallized. The universe groaned with the glory of motherhood. In the protoplanetary disk of dust grains surrounding what would eventually become our own lovely yellow sun, complex organic molecules that would become proteins were woven together as elements sought solace with one another in the cold and darkness of space. Eventually, dust called unto dust, and our planet came to be, its outside cooling to a hard crust like cosmic creme brulee. And when the crust was hard and thick, and the steam had cooled to water, abiogenesis began in a warm little pool filled with ammonia and salts and light and heat. In this primordial pool, individual proteins underwent complex and wonderful changes, the compounds binding themselves to one another and creating independent but connected systems until they became something far more than the sum of their parts. They became first in a chain that would eventually lead to us. Thanks.
Wow. That was so beautiful. That was really wonderful.
So this is me looking like the rest of you in the awe. We are Muggles, right? You just geeked out on us because I don't understand half of things you just said.
Well, but you understand the sentiment.
Yeah,
right?
But yeah, I get the sentiment, but then you just geeked out. And I was like, what?
I think it was really beautifully written. I think it definitely did what some great science fiction should do, which is explain it, but in this sort of lyrical, really wonderfully evocative language.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's your turn.
So I'm going to read a part about when one of my main characters, Astrid, decides to go to this planet called Terra-Two. Sometimes, her father would call upon new believers to tell the story of how they came to faith, their testimony, and this was hers. Astrid had grown up knowing that there was a distant planet outside her own solar system, a green twin of Earth orbiting dual stars. The first day that a longing to go there awoke inside her, she had been in assembly. All the children in her year group had been ushered into the school hall to watch a video, part of a presentation delivered by a team from the UK Space Agency. Another habitable planet, announced one of them across the darkened room, and the screen lit up with dazzling vistas of an alien land. Astrid saw an ocean, lush mountain ranges and terracotta canyons ridged like jewel box shells. They call it a new Earth, said the young astrobiologist with exaggerated air quotes. But our findings actually suggest that Terra-Two is many millions of years older than our own Earth. Truly, we're living on Terra-Two. Under the collar of her shirt, Astrid's neck prickled with goosebumps. She sat up as if she'd been called by name, and in a way, she had. This, they told her, was a place for the intrepid. The first settlers would not arrive until they were middle-aged, even if they left today. Their job would be to chart the terrain, to explore the land, to name the secret schools of fish that swept through coral reefs, and photograph night-blooming flowers. Someone in this room, they'd said, in a reverent whisper, may be the first to set foot in the crystalline caves that have formed underground. Astrid had imagined herself descending to find her own adult face reflected in the frosty mineral beams. This is a job for the brave, they'd said, a job for dreamers, for people who, like Astrid, woke every morning longing for another world. Imagine it, the recruiter had said, and Astrid had. That week, she bounced around with the hyper-energy of a new convert. She would get into Dalton. She would specialize in astrobiology. She would be accepted into the beta, and she would go to Terra-Two. Astrid would remember the years after that assembly and before the launch as a single shining line of triumph. The shortest route between point A, the naming of her desire, and point B, leaving Earth, its sole zenith of realization. Later, they would ask what she had been thinking when the hatch slammed shut. Had she been contemplating what a slow labor their mission was, how many minds and hands it had taken to get her to this point, to this 2-minute launch window? Or was she counting every sacrifice, every year of her life she had given and was still to give? As the flight director commenced the countdown, she heard Professor Stenton's measured voice crackle through the headset. "Take care of yourself," she said. The thing she said whenever she bid them goodbye from the driveway before a school trip or at the start of a holiday with the sun in her eyes. They would ask Astrid if she had been afraid, and she would answer no every time. And if she ever looked back at the strange arc of her life and wondered if any moment had been as perfect as dreaming of it, she would say, that one. The shuttle launched. Astrid burst through the luminescent atmosphere and into the black firmament beyond. She had been longing to leave her whole life, and finally, nothing was standing between her and the stars.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just by the way of information to the two of you, I feel really excited to be an African writer, writing at this moment with you guys, to exist at this moment. Because one of the very strong things about your work, both of your works, is the lyrical quality of the sentences. It's something I particularly enjoy reading. So thank you for that. So my next question is going to come to you, and it's going to come from another comment by another critic on your work. Colin Mondo called the book a doorstop.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, have you read anything by Kim Stanley Robinson,
Right.
Peter F. Hamilton, Stephen Baxter?
Peter
This
Hamilton
is a
is-
slim
This is
edition.
nothing. This is chapter 1 of Peter Hamilton's
Yeah.
book.
This isn't even number 1 of a saga of 14. Like, basically in my genre, this is kind of like average, I think. Yeah.
I mean, I'm really interested in why you chose to write a narrative that was essentially about a future, and you invested more in the moment. So it was like we were at a particular era for forever, you know, and then before the journey, and it was the most striking thing about the work.
Yeah, well, I chose to set the book in 2012, which was the year I started writing it. And there was like the London Olympics, and it was a high point before. But yeah, I made that choice because I wanted it to be as recognizable as possible. One of the sort of experiences I really wanted the reader to feel was like, I really wanted them to go with the characters on the journey.
Okay.
And I think like often when we see, you know, astronauts and engineers, like if they have lived quite a different life and their training, their sort of psychology is quite different and maybe a bit harder to relate to. So that's why I made sort of an active effort I made these characters young, they went to school, they have like quite relatable struggles.
I mean, while reading it, I was telling you guys yesterday, I just had to go back to the Porter series, like just read it and see the movies again, because like you invested so much in the school years, and I mean that must have been really difficult to pull off, you know, like to inhabit the lives of different teenagers and explain the kind of things that were going through their minds while they were in school, the competitions, all sorts of things that were happening. And so that was quite brilliant. Wole, it's quite to say it well. It's difficult for me to pick out questions in the narrative to ask you. But one of the things that I thought about asking as a fanboy was to ask you how it felt like to write a collection of short stories that touched on every aspect of life, you know, and because it's not, in case you were wondering, because I've been talking about them being geeks and stuff. But he was able to write a collection of short stories that were not majorly about sci-fi, and I found that really, really interesting. So, you know, from a fanboy to a god. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I think in terms of writing stories that are relatable, that cover a wide range of the human experience, I usually go back to something, I can't remember who said it right now, but it's a famous quote that people think science fiction is about the future. It's not. It's about the present, right? Because science fiction authors, we are not soothsayers, we're not magicians. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I can extrapolate reasonably, but there's so many ways the future can go, right? Every little thing people do today. There's a kid today studying something that could change the world in 5 years. I have no way of predicting that. But I can use the future as a lens to kind of interrogate and investigate things that are going on now. And with a lot of the stories, what I try to do is specific to the Nigerian experience. Most of my stories are set in Nigeria, in places I've grown up. Like I was born in Warri, so there's stories set in Warri. I spent a lot of my time in Lagos. There's stories, most of the stories are actually set in Lagos. Lagos is unique. Lagos itself is like a creature. It's its own thing. So most of my stories are set there, but what I wanted to do was, even though I'm talking about, or I'm setting the story in a futuristic sense, or even talking about people going to space and how that would work, it's about the present, about how human beings would react to that kind of drastic adventure, or of the amount of effort it takes to innovate like that, or how dastardly people can become when they're presented with an opportunity. Whether that opportunity is, you know, to get a business contract today, or to supply contracts for rockets to Saturn tomorrow, right? It's the same human emotion. People are essentially broadly the same. There's a wide range of human emotion, but broadly all of us capture pieces of that. So the stories are like different snapshots that focus on different aspects of people using the science fiction lens. And I'll just say, actually, it's not entirely science fiction. I was going to do that, but then Wednesday's story got nominated for the Game Prize, and it's a fantasy story, so it contaminated my nice little science fiction book with some fantasy. There's 2 of them in there. But broadly, what I wanted to do was use that science fictional lens to interrogate like the present, especially with Nigeria and Nigerians.
That's fabulous. A round of applause for him, please. So yeah, you with your work, Temi, you played with such topics as climate change and in an alternate. I mean, I decided to define that Earth, that space where they existed, the characters, as an alternate Earth. You know, with a rich history in space exploration and the likes. You know, so was it a safe decision to create this alternate world, if that was what you did, with a semblance of the kinds of issues that we might be facing currently, you know, and are you trying to say that whatever hope we have, you know, will be dashed?
Oh no!
Oh, my.
I hope that wasn't the takeaway message from my book. Yeah, so I chose to set it in alternate history because it's 2012, but obviously we're not capable of interstellar travel even here in 2019. So there's sort of a history of space travel going back even to like the late 1800s in my story. And the Americans did land on the moon, but then like quickly after the USSR landed on Mars. And lots of countries are involved in space travel in this world. I guess I can sort of see your point in that Terra-Two is kind of, it's almost a wish fulfillment, especially when we look at problems like climate change. It would be wonderful if there was another Earth. But a lot of the lessons that my characters learn is that like leaving everything behind isn't so easy. And when they leave Earth, they think about just how inhospitable all of space is. I was sort of hoping that people would come away from the book with a real awe and like wonder at our own Earth, because like it's so perfect for us. And we do need to, and to get anywhere else, even if there was a conveniently close by planet, is not a small endeavor.
I mean, another thing I really liked about the book was the lack of aliens. And,
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
it was interesting because it also said another thing to me. I make lots of conspiracy theory story. It also said another thing to me that we can do all bad by ourselves. I mean, was that something you were also gunning for? Like that the human experience, we as humans, we are fucked up little creatures, you know, and that we are as bad is.
I don't know. Like, I think quite a lot of the book is about loneliness. Yeah. There's like the kind of personal loneliness of like all of the characters and their lives that they've lived and their various kinds of like isolation and insecurities. Then obviously there's the loneliness of the crew. But then I made a kind of conscious effort they live in this world where, for whatever reason, we know there's no alien life. And I think like science fiction, like really, I mean, we all really enjoy entertaining the idea of aliens and like what that would mean for us, like philosophically, how should we treat them? But also, what does it mean if there is no one else? What does it mean about our consciousness? Like, and all of the characters sort of interpret this differently. And one of them says, if there is no one else, then maybe it's our duty to like spread ourselves all through the universe, because we're the only conscious being. We're the only thing capable. We're like the eyes of the universe able to look at itself. And so maybe we have a duty to keep ourselves alive.
I mean, that's basically what the Europeans did, and we know how that ended.
Yeah,
anyway.
that is true.
Yeah.
There's that too.
I mean, science fiction does have a strong connection with colonial aspirations, unfortunately.
Definitely.
But I would like to think we're reclaiming it.
Yeah.
We're reclaiming that.
Okay, so a question for you, Wole, or another question. Your work has appeared on several shortlists over time. You won the Nomos last year. How's the culture of prizes? I mean, they're taking this out of the book, conversation. So I'm really interested in understanding how the culture of prizes, in the practice of writing itself, how it has affected your craft, yeah.
It's an interesting question. I've said to people, if you write with prizes in mind, or with sales numbers, or with some kind of commercial glory aspiration in mind, you might succeed. I can't guarantee you won't, but I can almost guarantee you'll probably be boring. Just because writing is so much of a personal thing, you need to find your own voice. Your inspiration is based on the things that interest you. And if you start thinking externally, like, oh, the prize went to this guy last year. What did he write about? Let me write about that. Oh, he used this voice. Let me use that. Then you're kind of getting lost, right? So I usually say, forget about it, right? You write your story first. When you're done, then you're like, maybe this prize would like it. Let's see. You try. And if you don't get it, it's fine. You've written the story anyway. You enjoyed it. Maybe somebody on the street enjoyed it too. It's okay. That being said, it is nice to get prizes, right? Everybody likes to get prizes. We're all Nigerians. We like to win, right? Nigeria, they carry last. So, you get nominated for something. It's a good feeling. But it hasn't affected my craft much. I still write the kinds of stories I want. I still get rejections all the time. I recently got one where the editor said my work was aggressively unreadable. I was like, cool. It's just fine. It was mostly unreadable. It was very abstract. I was trying to write from the point of view of a computer circuit, so it's very abstract. It's fine. I might revise it. We'll see. But it doesn't change the craft. For me, I write based on what I'm interested in, what I take inspiration from, and I just keep doing that. If the prizes come, they come. If they don't, so be it. It's okay.
Okay. What about you? I mean, same question.
I have no prizes to comment on as of yet. But
they're on the way.
Winning
probably.
Is nice, so I hope that is heard out in the universe. Yeah.
All right then. So I want to give you guys the chance to contribute to this conversation. So if you have questions for the authors, just like raise your hands and let the mic find you. Questions? Anybody? Awesome. Okay. Please, is there a microphone moving around? Is ready to find the lady there.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
My question is for the both of you. I work with a space media company, and we've been trying to create this awareness where the younger generations, by younger generations, I mean 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, are aware of space opportunities in Africa, are aware of what is going on in Africa as it regards to the space industry. So my question is this: are you guys exploring figures? Are you exploring events in the African space, or, yes, the African space industry?
Okay. You want to?
Well, I guess since mine is like an alternate history, no, except that the captain of this this mission is Nigerian, so there is that. I guess one of the wonderful things about space is it definitely, I think children have we naturally feel quite inspired by it, because space says like adventure and otherworldliness. It says something like grand and far away and unknown. So yeah, I think it's really important to try and inspire the next generation.
Yeah. I haven't worked with any specific organizations, and I haven't engaged with them directly. It's interesting. I probably would be interested in doing that, just from a communications point of view. Unfortunately, I don't live on the continent, and I I do have a full-time job that takes up 99% of my time. But yeah, it's something I'm definitely interested in because inspiration is a big part of what I try to do. I was personally inspired by science fiction as a child. It's a big part of why I ended up becoming an engineer right now. It's a big part of why I enjoy it. And I've seen this with friends and kids, children of friends as well. If you come at them saying, here's physics, equations, symbols, math, if you fail it, we'll punish you. You lose them immediately. If you come at it with, here's a really interesting story, or here's a really interesting demonstration of why water will flow this way if you do this. You get their curiosity. Children are naturally curious, right? You get their curiosity. So packaging it in story and things like that, it's a big part of what I do. And yeah, that's something I'd be interested in looking at doing more, I guess, from afar.
I know, yeah, space is a really great way to get children into physics. Like, my husband is a physics teacher, and whenever he's teaching space, he's like, okay, this is my chance. If I don't get them with space, like, maybe atoms, but honestly, if they're not interested in space, I might lose them forever. Like,
right.
Space is the crown jewels of physics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have another person who is about, can you get her the mic? And after her, okay, you can do.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Sin. Sin is spelled S-Y-N. I run Sin City NG. My question is this, to Temi and to Wole as well. Did you have to, I noticed both of you still bear your native names. Mm-hmm. Did you have to change or reach a compromise to be accepted in the genre you are presently in? I know you speak like a Londoner, so perhaps it would have been easier for you, and you live abroad as well. For those of us who bear either Amaka and live in Nigeria and live in Lagos, who have no plans of migrating to the West anytime soon, how do we do it? My question is, did you have to tweak some parts of your identity to be accepted in the sci-fi genre?
We can get more questions.
I think that's a really good question because, like, I'm not gonna lie, I definitely had a real anxiety about that when I was growing up, especially in London, like with a name, my last name's Ochiboju, and I definitely always had, like, when people were reading registers, they'd be like, and I remember my mum saying that, like, it doesn't matter because, like, who knew how to say Schwarzenegger before he became famous? So there is that, there's definitely, but I think I kind of chose the nickname that I went by in school because there are lots of Temis. There was another Temi in my year who was Temi A and I was Temi O. So yeah, I kind of sort of chose that as to write under that name. I guess also because it's a good way of like keeping my author self and like professional self kind of separate from my personal self. But I think for everyone, it's a really personal decision what you decide to do with your name. But I think you definitely shouldn't change it because you feel like you need to conform, because then everyone will feel a pressure to do that. And you should be really proud of your name. So, yeah.
For me, no, I didn't. I'd never even considered using a different name to fit into. I think science fiction in particular. A lot of the time we write about very strange, very otherworldly things. There are more bizarre, made-up names in science fiction and fantasy than any real Nigerian name you could come up with. There are things I cannot even pronounce in books I have read. So you're not going to sound strange at all. The science fiction genre, science fiction in general is a bit more open, I've found, than, say, traditional publishing. The science fiction community is quite open to strangeness and difference and just being other. It's fine, usually. So no, I never considered it. I never had a problem with it. To someone working locally, I think if you're writing science fiction here and you're worried about breaking out in the industry, I think the biggest barrier is it's not name or culture or anything. It's probably infrastructure. It's, time, access to power, to your computer, those small things that eat away at your ability to just get the job done, to just write, to just imagine. If you're trying to think of very abstract concepts, but you have to keep worrying about whether you can pump water or when NEPA is going to bring back light. That's a bigger barrier than, say, your name sounds a bit unusual to Western people. It's the least thing to worry about.
I mean, just like adding this to the conversation, over time, it's a name. The name conversation is something that is personal to me also, because I exist in two different worlds, and I exist in one world as someone else with another name, and then there's Tolu Daniel that a lot of people know, and so and when I made that decision, the decision was made on the basis of it had nothing to do with accessibility, or was I thinking about any kind of barrier. I just wanted to, like you said, separate my personal self from my, writer self. So I'm able to exist in this two different places with comfort,
Right.
So you find me in that place, and you are like, Tolu, you do this too. And of course, I did share, So that's just it. So we still have one more question.
It's definitely also helpful if you have a day job as well. Yeah.
Hello. It's a big privilege being here today, but thank you very much for describing my problem about electricity and water, and not having time, because
It's
we don't
our
have
problem.
light.
It's our problem. I used to live here until I was in my late 20s.
Well, my question is for the both of you, because my name is Temi, by the way. I'm currently writing my first fiction, science fiction kind of, and I'm stuck, basically, because it is like a mix between technology and history, like African history, like deep African history. We're going all the way back. And I'm stuck because I'm not a science person. And there are sometimes I ask myself, okay, if I say this character, just with no ship, science is included, by the way, no ship, you just broke the rules of gravity and all, you just flew to space. Nothing, like, I'm just standing, I just fly to space. Like, how believable would it be to my readers? Like, would they look at me and say, there are rules and you have refused to follow these rules in your fiction? And I don't know how you've both managed to do it, but that's the place I'm at right now. I don't know how to maneuver just little things that in the end I think will sort of like matter.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question about basically how important is the science, and how much attention should you pay to the science, and should it govern the direction of the story, which I think especially you do wonder as a science fiction author. I guess you have to think about your audience as well, because no matter what story you're writing, there will be someone who'll say, but what propulsion system did your ship use? And it could be your choice to say, well, I don't have an answer because, but I think we've chosen to write fiction for a reason, and it's because we want to inspire people, because we want to tell a story, and the main aim of fiction is to entertain. And the thing is with science fiction, you'll always reach a point where the technology doesn't exist, or it doesn't go in the direction that you need it to go. And it's your choice if you're going to try and explain that, or if you're going to say, well, for the purpose of the story, I'm going to ignore that. But I definitely do think if you've chosen to write in science fiction, it will help you if you do some research, and it will also inspire you a bit more, because I'm often surprised to find how many things already exist. I often think, oh, well, it would be great if someone could do, I don't know, this thing, and then like a scientist has said, well, if we could do this, then we could teleport to this place, So I think that if you start with the research and you start by seeing what's there, it might help you with your story as well. But it's a really personal and artistic choice how much attention you're going to pay, on a scene-by-scene basis to the science. Yeah?
Sorry, wait, where's the microphone, please? Hi, stay there, there's someone here.
Okay, I'd like to ask, when it comes to African tradition and the likes or history, where we come from, what we like, how, I don't know, creative can you get? Because there's like a very thin line between being realistic and saying, okay, this is what we had historically in the past, and me saying, okay, I want to create this other universe where, you know, Africans are just washing by the sea and doing all those other stuff. So I'd also like to ask, because I've asked the science area, I also like to come to the African part too and ask that, okay, is there like a line that I'm not supposed to cross?
But I mean, look at like all of European fantasy as well. Like, look at Tolkien. I mean, he's clearly used like some parts of history, the bits he likes, and then added elves or orcs.
Okay.
There's no reason that you can't like sort of, you can add whatever you feel inspired to add.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it really just comes down to the objective of your story. Why are you telling the story?
To
What are you
educate.
trying to achieve? If you're trying to educate, then I think at least having a base of
Realistic.
reality is
Yeah.
important,
Yeah.
right? Because if you're trying to educate people, the worst thing is to teach people the wrong thing, right? You can extrapolate. You can clearly say this is fiction. Most science fiction, actually my favorite kind of science fiction, you always start with a solid base of realism. This is the world, and then you just tweak it. You make one change. What if we could do this? I know we can't, but what if we could? And then you build on that. But it's important to have that base if you're trying to educate. Now, if you just want to tell an entertaining story, hand wave, we call it hand wave.
Wait,
Yeah,
it's
hand
interesting.
waving.
It's
Hand wave
interesting.
everything.
It's interesting you'd say that though, especially because it's fiction. Yeah.
Right.
I believe you, as a writer, just one of many things your story should do is to educate. It's just one of many things a story can do. It can educate, can entertain. So I feel, from my muggle mind, that it's possible that you could take liberties. Yes.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing about our idea of African histories, because like it's not like we are fully aware of the extent of how deep the history really is. So you take a story, you know something, and you feel like you can go all the way with it. Take all the liberties you want, please. It's fiction.
Yeah, thank you. Because
Yeah.
there's this part about African artifacts that we're still begging Western museums to return to us, and so I'm sort of stuck there also because I feel like I can't know all those artifacts, and I feel like I should be able to create some in my brain. I should just say, okay, this has the power to do this, and this has the power to do this, and all.
Also, thank you very much for your contribution.
Really good question.
Another thing I would just like to say to you is that your work will benefit a lot from research, like you said. So it's how you're able to move from whatever sport you are right now. So yeah, we have someone here with another question. Please, no, someone here. She's been here. She'll kill me, you know. 'Cause yeah, of course we can.
Hi. My question is for Wole.
Okay.
So as regards the feedback that you got, I know you drop it very casually. The aggressively unreadable computer circuit.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how much you're willing to revise it. How do you take this feedback? Do you decide, oh, this person didn't get it, and I will move on, and I will find somebody else who will get it?
Right.
Or are you willing to get feedback for 2, 3 other people who say, really, it is really unreadable, and I really need to go back, and when is a no the time for you to go back and start over?
That's a very hard question to answer. It's very personal, I think, and it depends on the situation. For me, I think there's nothing worse than someone that is not willing to change their mind because they're basically stuck, and that's the end of that. I'm always willing to change my mind. Even if I went in thinking this was the best idea, if someone tells me it's aggressively unreadable and says why, especially when it comes to stories, there's no objective truth to fiction. Fiction is, sometimes people give you useful critique like, I didn't connect with this character. I can now go back and ask myself, why didn't they connect with the character? Could I add something or remove something to make it work better? And if I ask myself that question and say, no, actually I can't. If I take this out, it doesn't work anymore. If I put this in, it's not what I wanted to write. Then I reject the feedback and I try someone else. But sometimes you get useful feedback and you think about it and you're like, actually, I could have done more. Or I could have put a slightly different spin on it. Then I absorb that feedback and I make changes. But yeah, it's very personal. It depends on the situation and the work. But I'm always open to that question of revising things based on feedback.
I mean, that's, again, me just like saying something. It's one of the key functions of what the concept of the workshop, understanding what constructive feedback is and knowing how you can deal with it. So we have a lady who also wants to ask a question in the back. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for your wonderful compliments yesterday, Temi. Okay, so we live on the African continent, and here things like science, technology, forensics, they aren't really developed. So my question essentially is, how do you create a science fiction novel? How do you create, like, say, a crime novel that involves technology, forensic sciences, and things like that, that is both realistic and indigenously African?
I actually think that's one of the great things about it. Like, that's the thing that will make it different. If you're, say, trying to write like a crime or a science fiction, and novels are all about challenges, and a protagonist wants something, but he comes up against different challenges. And if there are like infrastructure challenges, that's great. Like, definitely put that in the story, because that will make the story richer, and it will also speak to people from, like, they understand it, because it's like, yeah, it's everyone's lives.
Yeah, I think it can be hard, I understand, if you're surrounded by daily challenges and infrastructure challenges. And when you see science fiction from other countries, most science fiction comes from the West, clearly. Sometimes it can be hard to make that mental jump to say you can imagine that too. But I think you can make it authentic by actually addressing the challenges that we have here. And that's one thing I like about what Nnedi Okorafor is doing recently. Personally, I don't mind the term Afrofuturism, but she's gone one step more to refine it to what I think is very useful on the continent, talking about African futurism that centers Africa. So now if I'm thinking about robots, I'm not just thinking robots in the abstract. I'm thinking, based on the current African context, what kind of robots would we actually have, right? Can we even have self-driving cars that can navigate, bad roads with lots of potholes? I guarantee you nothing Google is building right now will work on Nigerian roads. Nothing. Yeah. But that could be the plot of a science fiction story. Someone could re-engineer that code to work. You could actually think, right? What kind of data do we need to modify existing technology to address those challenges? You don't have to fully form it, but just the idea alone could inspire someone to start thinking about it. And before you know it, there's usually this feedback loop between science fiction and real science, of like inspiration, development. More development breeds more inspiration, and you get caught in that loop. And I love that loop, right? And I think we need more of it. And African futurism, thinking specifically about what is going on the continent, and how can we address that from not necessarily a political angle, but from a science fictional problem overcoming angle, it could be great. You could get great stories out of it. You could get great inspiration out of it. So I think that's actually what a lot of people hear. I encourage everyone to read Nnedi's blog. She just posted a specific definition for African futurism, I think about a week ago. I encourage everyone to read it. And if you're thinking or you're interested in science fiction, I think that's the headspace that works best for Africans. You can write any other kind of science fiction you want, but I think it's a good jumping off point for all of us, especially people on the continent.
Thank you very much, Wole. So we'll take our last question from the back.
So, confession, it's not a question, it's a comment, so please don't kill me. I've heard about two different people talk about asking, and it's quite disturbing to me. So first of all, Wole and Temi, I'd like to thank you. Wole, you know that I have been harassing you, and these questions are exactly why I've been harassing you. I'm thanking you for the African representation in science fiction, because I'm quite upset at the type of questions that we're asking. Science does exist in Africa, and it is absolutely possible for Africans to write science fiction.
Oh, yeah.
There are so many writers out there. Mohale just brought out a book that is science fiction oriented. Buy Temi's book. Read Wole's stories. Read Nadi's stories. Leslie, what's her surname?
Leslie Neka,
yeah, if you read what it means, the title story is a science fiction story set in Nigeria. Please, if you paid attention in secondary school science alone, you don't even have to have a university background. If you have enough and you have an imagination, it is absolutely possible to write science fiction without needing to see forensics or needing to see CSI Lagos. So please, let's not do this to ourselves. We have everything we need right here to write science fiction and write it well. Please stop following my hand.
Thank you.
You need a clap.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
I'd just like to add something as well, which I've come across a few times. Personally, I think science is not a body of knowledge. People come at this thinking, well, if I'm writing science fiction, it has to be rooted in chemistry or physics or math. Not necessarily. Science is not any one body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking. It's a systematic, logic, evidence-based, testing-based approach to understanding the world. Science has existed in Africa long before we encountered any other cultures. It will continue to exist. The difference is we don't think of what we used to do as science. And a lot of it, in some cases, we never jumped past that point of taking a body of knowledge and applying a systematic thought process to it. But if you go back and you look at things like Ifa divination, or even the kinds of herbs people used to treat, medicine, traditional African medicine, a lot of it was evidence and logic based. You just never formalized it. These are all roots and elements you can take and write stories about. And in doing the research, you will find a lot of good things. One of the things I love about science fiction, it forces you to study, to get that base. You do a lot of research and you find out so many things that you thought never existed, have always existed. And then you can take from there and jump off and do something else with it. Come up with what it could look like in the future.
I mean, interestingly, to just round up, half of the things, I mean, I don't know who sees this series on Netflix, Black Mirror. I mean, most of the time, we talk about all this fancy and fantastical stuff, and in the news the next day, we just see something happening. Basically the same thing from a Black Mirror episode. So thank you, everybody, for showing up here today. A big round of applause for my guests. So thank you.